pool that really hasn't gotten much faster because there really aren't many opportunities for you to pull on a trash together. But also, the runs we saw yesterday in theater weren't clean at all, so maybe Perplexed or Evolving here could show us how to do that run faster.
Let's find out as game number 1 between Perplexed and Evolving gets rolling here in theater.
All right, so it looks like we already have an interesting comp choice by both of the teams. We see the double Prod Warrior being brought by Perplexed and Evolving, and then we see the Disc Priest on Perplexed side. Interesting choice. We have seen the Priest a lot here, specifically in Theater of Pain, but usually we saw it because they didn't want to play a Shadow Priest for the PI, for the Fire Mage. But there's no mage at all in either of those comps. So I wonder what exactly the Disc Priest is for here for Perplexed. We might see something later on when it all makes sense all of a sudden. But yeah, other than that, the comps are the same. Just the Priest versus the Paladin Healer for Evolving.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that would make the most sense to me is that it's a Mass Dispel for the bursting. That's probably just a big safety play.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, the Paladin brings way more damage than the Priest does. But also, Theater of Pain doesn't really have too many of those giant AoE pulls, right? You have pretty much only the Gore Chop Wing is full of giant AoE pulls. Everything else is pretty much pure single target blast the entire dungeon. So I don't know. There might not be enough value gained from having an Ashen Hollow, and that might end up being a better strategy for them. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, very possible. I'm also thinking about this one Gore Chop pull that I talked about earlier with the snapping. I would assume that Ashen is better for that specifically, but we'll see. They also don't have that same, sheesh comp with the mage that would be helping to blast that pull, so maybe neither of those teams are actually going to be trying that specific snapping pull. But we'll see, as they both are now done with the first boss at the exact same second, as you can see in the boss timers downstairs. So they had the exact same damage, which again brings us back to the Holy Paladin. The Holy Paladin did more damage for Evolving, but Perplexed, the rest of the team of Perplexed did somehow more damage to make up for that lost healer damage.
Well, the important thing to mention as well is, yes, they killed the boss at the exact same time, but Perplexed had extra trash in. Evolving only pulled the Bloodhorn in. Perplexed pulled all of the trash before the boss in, so they actually were able to get through that a lot quicker. And honestly, like, PI value on Hunter and Dungeons is actually insanely high, because they are a 2-minute class, right? I mean, I guess Kyrian Arrow isn't 2 minutes, but still, True Shot is 2 minutes, right? So it's still pretty value to have on that class. Actually, I'm curious. They might not give it to the Hunter. They might give it to the Monk for more GG procs. So, I'm actually not too sure what the best choice is there.
So Ryzen actually just died for Perplexed, and they don't have a Battle Res class, but they should be able to finish this off. There we go. They got the Battle Res back up, and Evolving is now. They took a little bit of a different path, actually. They pulled Varuth first, and now they're moving into the same area that Perplexed is in. So definitely choose to do a little bit of a different path here. Alex pulled a Shackled Soul, which looked like it wasn't intended because they were using the Shroud there. So not sure if that is going to be a problem with their percentage. Maybe they're going to be overkilling something later on. Thankfully, there's no Pride anymore, so they're not going to be getting weird Pride timings or anything like that. But it might still mean that they're going to have a weird pathing later on. Perplexed still no issues whatsoever as they're moving on to those two Magi.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of highlighted how dangerous this Arcalath pull was yesterday, and Perplexed just kind of trucked through it, no problem. Evolving also not having no issues with it as well. Yes, their health bars are a little low, but there's not any major burst damage that comes out of Incinerator. It's usually just ticking damage over time, kind of like a low stack Prideful from last season. As long as you get those Inferno interrupts, you should be totally fine. But Perplexed just trucking on ahead, already one entire trash pull ahead of Evolving now. Just kind of flexing those DPS muscles that they probably also gained by having that PI on their Monk here. You saw that in that last pack, just spamming out those spinning crank kicks.
Yeah, and now we can already see a little bit of a difference with Perplexed being one pull ahead, basically. But of course, you also have to keep in mind that Evolving has 2 Tormentors down already, while Perplexed only has 1.
Evolving went left? They went to the Shackled Soul pack instead of the 2 mages? Wait a minute.
Oh, they did?
They did. They went. Huh. I don't think I've ever seen anybody go left there. Ever,
I don't think
actually.
so either.
usually that's an accident. Also, it appears that Evolving also dealt with a second tormented mob that we must have missed. You can
Yeah,
see
they
the
killed the
tormented...
Ruth before they went to
okay, and Perplexed
the
didn't.
second one.
Must have been for cooldown timings. Interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder if Perplex is going to deal with Baruth eventually, or if they actually decide to not do it for the last boss and leave all those 3 Tormentors up. What did we see Sheesh do yesterday? Do you remember how many they killed?
I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how many they killed. I would assume it would have been 2.
Baruth is pretty dangerous. Yeah. Having 3 on the last boss is definitely really dangerous, especially because that last boss does a lot of tank damage, but that's why they probably brought the Prod Warriors, because you can actually spell reflect half of the tank ability that I forgot the name of, because it does half physical and half magic damage, so you can basically reflect half of the damage onto the boss, which is a huge damage increase for that boss specifically, and it also makes it a lot safer on the tank damage as well.
Right, and I mean, that healing reduction debuff is especially dangerous on any boss where there's a whole lot of unavoidable damage, right? And there is a decent amount of that on the final boss in Theater of Pain. Of course, the big thing I'm thinking of is that 50% transition where the boss will explode and do like 2/3 of everyone HP on higher key levels. But I guess it might not be too bad on a 20. We'll see what Perplex does. After Toltharok, they'll have the option to pull the there. We'll know very quickly what the strategy is going to be.
Yeah, one thing to note about Evolving, first of all, they just lost their Hunter and had to use a Battle Rush to get him back up. But it almost seems like they're doing a little bit of like backtracking and walking weird directions, right? As they, for example, they went to Varuth first and then they went back and walked to the other wing. And now it also looks like, first they went left side and then they went to a different area as well. So it looks like they definitely have a plan going into this, of course, but it seems like it's a bit slow with the walking and the pathing they have to take. So we'll see if they manage to catch up at some point. The one Tormentor that they're ahead, I don't think that's going to make up for the difference right now, because they're 2% trash behind and they're like half a boss behind at this point. So I don't think Baruth is really making up for that time difference there so far.
Well, it's not only Varuth, right? You can see in the top right there for Evolving that it looked like the Hunter just didn't hit Bloodlust on the first boss. They only have just now popped it on Toltharok. Now, that could have been an accident. They might have not meant to do it on purpose, or they could have been saving the Bloodlust for this pull where they're pulling in the Shackled Souls on top of Toltharok, which can be kind of dangerous. So saving Lust for this point in the dungeon does make at least a little bit of sense. And on top of that, it's not like you're losing a Bloodlust usage. Technically, I believe Theater of Pain keys on MDI should be below 20 minutes, so you're only going to get a second Lust anyways, and that second Lust should come up by the final boss, even if you wait until right now to pop it. So I don't think they lost a usage of it. It's just a question of whether or not it's more valuable here versus on the first boss.
Yeah, if they think they're going to save more time here, then it definitely does make sense to just hold on to it if you're not going to lose a usage. Perplex already done with the boss now, as they're going to be moving on. We'll see what wing they choose to go to next. Now that trash is evened out with those souls, the Shackled Souls that Evolving did pull on top of the boss. So the trash is pretty even. The only difference now is that Tormentor, of course. So Perplex going to the workshop area. We'll see what they choose to do here. As we can see, Ashine is stealthing ahead, probably pulling the patrol on top of this, which is really dangerous actually, because there's a lot of interrupts you need to do. There's a double butcher, and then you have a lot of these spewers that need to be interrupted. But with the huge amount of damage that they have here, it actually seems to be no problem, because they just killed them before they actually cast it, I think. Actually, never mind. There's still quite a few spewers alive, so they need to make sure they interrupt them here. Otherwise, they're going to get that huge damage reduction on everybody.
Okay, they only have 3 alive now, and interrupts should be coming back up, so I think they're going to be fine. That was a little bit scary. You can see there was like a couple of damage abilities that went out on Swag too. He was getting pretty low, but they're going to be totally fine. All those Slush Spears are down except for one. Very clean pull from them. And yeah, that's one of the scariest pulls in the dungeon, and probably the only point where I think a giant AoE pull can actually be scary. We're going to see Evolving go for that exact same pull here. Looks like, yeah, the Hunter's grabbing the patrol as well, so got to keep an eye on their usage. Can they keep those Sludge Spears CC'd properly, not use too much of the CC, make sure they get everything dead? I think one of the things that really helps this comp a lot, and helps this type of pull out, is the Pro here actually bursts for a lot of AoE damage, more than most other tanks that we see.
Yeah, that's definitely really good for them. And then you also have the the additional damage from the holy. Actually, I'm not really sure if he used Ashen here on Evolving side. It looked like they were dealing with it pretty quickly. Perplex was actually a little bit slow at the very end of that pull because they didn't have an interrupt for the meat shield. So the Horde basically just had half his health in a shield because they didn't have an extra interrupt for that with all the sludge spewers needing to be interrupted. So that's why that pull took a little bit longer for Perplexed, as they're now moving on and doing this insane pull that we have seen before in Season 1, where they just go with the patrol and all of the mobs here, plus the gas bag. So this is a pretty dangerous pull, especially since they just did a big pull before. So they're gonna be not having all of those cooldowns up. We see the True Shot being popped by Wolf Disco and the PI as well, probably being buffed to Wolf as well. Yeah, there we go. You can see the PI on the Hunter. And Swag's still doing more damage. Yeah,
Yep.
nice procs.
Just spin to win, man. That's all you gotta do. Just spin and do more damage, and then maybe do double damage with Bone Dust for it too. That's pretty sick. Yeah, I mean, they're making it look easy, right? Their 2 minute cooldowns were spaced out perfectly for that. They used the 2 minutes on the big pull upstairs, then they had them back up for the big pull downstairs because that first pull took a long time for them to finish off. Like, so it's just really well planned out the way they have this dungeon set up. I guess I was a little wrong when I was saying there weren't a lot of big pulls. You can make the pulls big in this section of the dungeon, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen people try to go for a strategy where they just pull all that trash on top of the boss as well. I'm sure at some point in the season we'll get to the point where teams feel comfortable enough to do that. Maybe if we had like a lower level theater key, you could see that happen. But yeah, I mean, massive AoE pulls, and then you have good focus single target too coming out of the sub rope for bosses like this.
Yeah, Evolving though on the other hand, oh, okay, so they actually are doing that snapping strat, it looks like, as the misdirect is coming out on the pet here, and Lucy is now attempting to do it, but I'm not sure if it's actually working out for them right here, as he does go down. Oh, so he had lost his turtle, and there's definitely something that went wrong here for sure. Yeah, so this is a problem if you attempt this strategy, right? Like, if you attempt this strategy and it doesn't work out, well, then all of a sudden you have a problem, right? Because it takes you so long to get back there. So at this point, they just are abandoning it for now, and they're going to the third wing that they still have to do. So this is a huge time loss for them, because they waited all this time for Vusi to actually get down to Gourd Shop, and then something went wrong and didn't actually work out. So Perplexed, on the other hand, they're up to 73% trash, and they're already done with the Gourd Shop. So Evolving definitely really far behind now because of this failed attempt on that Gourd Shop snap, basically.
Yeah, and we saw that snap pulled off yesterday, although I'm still not sure if that's a faster strategy than what we just saw Perplexed do, right? 2 back-to-back AoE pulls and then pull the last 2 mobs on top of the boss. It seemed pretty quick already on its own, so I'm not sure a strategy like that is like 100% necessary to go as fast as possible. Of course, with the giant downside of having this happen whenever it fails. I mean, you pretty much have to go next at that point. They're going to still try, obviously, because you need to make sure you're giving it the best go. If Perplexed does end up having wipes in this section of the wing, which we've seen from other teams, especially Sheesh yesterday, you want to give yourself the best opportunity to win. But it definitely is unfortunate that they have to pretty much scrap their planned route and go to a separate wing because they weren't able to pull off that skill.
Yeah, I'm also not so really sure. That's also something that we've talked about in the past, where sometimes in these speedrunning keys, there's multiple things that you could set up, and then you do this like really fancy pull. Like, for example, if we think back to Ataldazar, where we saw this like these insane snaps on top of Rasan. But then at some point we saw that the highest level teams stopped doing these, or at least they didn't pull as much trash onto Rasan, even though they could pull more, just because the actual setup time to set up that pull took longer than what they actually would have gained from executing it. So sometimes just pressing W and just pulling as big as you can, it's just faster than doing something like that requires a pretty big setup, right? So Vusi basically messing up that skip twice in a row just cost them so much time that I think if Perplexes make a huge mistake here, it's going to be incredibly hard for Evolving to catch up here. Of course, Perplex still has one of the hardest wings left at this point, so they have to deal with this pretty cleanly as well. But yeah, definitely a huge time loss for Evolving, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I like their adaptation for this pull to make it a lot easier on them. They've CC'd the captain off in the corner. Of course, the captain makes the mobs around him take less damage from AoE. So CCing him off in the corner so you can cleave down those Arbalest quickly makes this pull a lot safer. And I believe they're going to have to deal with that after the fact unless they can all shadow mode it. I'm not sure. I haven't checked what ratios they're actually playing. Let's see. No, most of them are dwarves, so they're going to have to deal with that captain at some point, I believe. Let's see.
Yeah, they probably have to, unless... Yeah, okay.
Well, unless the hunter trap feigned it.
Yeah, maybe the hunter was the only one who was in combat and can
that's
de-aggro
probably
it.
what happened. Yeah, I believe that's what happened. It just reset just now. That's what it was doing running back. So, on to Zav for them.
Ashine just vanished too, so I guess Ashine was also in combat, but somehow
maybe
managed
that's
to
true,
de-aggro.
Well, either way, there's no captain aggro onto them right now. All they have to worry about is Zav the Unfallen. Now, they're at 98% trash, so they're not done with their trash yet. Oh, no, wait, they brought the captain all the way to the boss and just kept it in a trap. Okay, interesting. But Wolf Disco is dead, so they're going to have to use their final battle res on him, and that's going to be a little weird on timing because this boss is about to send the other 2 DPS players downstairs. Of course, Divine Field able to get that battle res off with the engineering res while the boss is casting his chains to get the 2 DPS players downstairs, so not too big of a deal there. Yeah, looks like it's going to be no issue for them. Just got to make sure they don't get hit by any of those cleaves and they'll be fine here.
Wow, Ashine got swagged down so quickly there in that arena phase. That's one of the fastest arena phases I've ever seen. Just the rogue value, I guess, getting down with that quicker, making sure both of the DPS are back at the boss fast. They have their Bloodlust back up, but it looks like they're saving it for that last boss. They also need that 2%, which they can either... Actually, they did pull everything on the first pull. Do you remember? Because they had 7% trash, right?
They have
so
the
there's no more.
in the corner.
Yeah, so they're just gonna get this captain maybe snapped up to the last boss even, or they just cleave it down with this boss at some point. It doesn't look like they're doing that, so maybe they're just snapping it up. Interesting, because they could cleave it down with this boss, but maybe it's just easier because they have the Bloodlust upstairs with the last boss, so maybe it's just easier for them to cleave it down with that one.
I don't think you would snap it up. I think you'd just kill it here afterwards, right? Because there's RP.
I guess you have to wait for the RP.
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense, I guess. If you just wait for one person to go up, then you might as well just use your time to get 2%. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so that's what they're doing. I believe they have swag going to start the boss RP because Windwalker Monk without cooldowns on single target kind of just does nothing. So he's going to go start the RP. The rest of them are going to deal with this captain. Once he's dead, they'll all go upstairs and start dealing with the final boss of Theater of Pain, and looks like Perplexed is once again like cruising to an easy victory in this first dungeon. Now, of course, there were some issues on the side of Evolving. I don't think this was their best effort, unfortunately, but it still looked like Perplexed was on their way to a victory.
Third try for Boosie.
Oh, here we
okay,
go.
guys.
Let's see if he can
Let's
get it.
cheer him on. He can actually do it. And one thing to note as well is that I know people always, call out those players when they make a mistake like this, especially if it's such a crucial mistake. But you have to understand just how much pressure there is on the hunter to actually get this done, because you just saw how big of a time loss it was to not make it. And it reminds me of the healer strategy with the awakened mobs, when the healer had to kite like 3 or 4 awakened mobs at the very last boss, and people were always, making fun of the healers if they actually died. But that's it. You make one mistake and you lose so much time, right? So really a big shout out to Boosie for trying it for a third time. It looks like it's working out this time around. There we go. I think he can do it. It definitely looks a lot cleaner than the pulls before. He does have the turtle available, and he should be snapping down in a second. There we go. All right. So now they can get this last pull done, and they're onto the last boss as well. But unfortunately, it's too little too late, as Perplexed is already fighting more Dretha, and that boss is just melting with all their cooldowns that they have available here. It's already down to 20%.
Yep, I mean, this boss gets completely shredded, especially with Lust. You don't even need the Prideful buff to burst this boss down like we saw last season. This boss just instantly dies when you have all your cooldowns and Lust available. Down to 15% now. It's going to be an easy first game victory here for Perplexed. I mean, honestly, it's kind of what we expected. Wait, hold on. Ashine died, but the boss is at 10%, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue. This is kind of, I believe, this is what we come to expect from Perplexed, right? They're some of the cleanest players in the MDI, and they're just showing it off here.
Last bit of percent going down there as Perplexed taking game number 1 here in Theater of Pain. So again, what we've been expecting out of this team, just the clean execution, the strong strategies going into it here. They do take that very convincing victory. And, on the side of Evolving as well, Titles, it seems like they had the strats, but that's just the thing, is if they don't have that execution for it, unfortunately, Hunter get broken out early through multiple runs to try to get that grip downstairs. But on the side of Divine Field and everybody there at Perplexed, they were just slamming through.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things too is that Perplex was able to not pull the Executioner with the last boss. That was going to end up saving them an insurmountable amount of time. I think if you kind of merged these two routes from both of these teams, where you had Perplex doing that camo Gourd Chop Snap tech, where if you had Evolving playing 3 of the Tormented mobs with Mordretha as opposed to only potentially playing 2 of the Tormented mobs with Mordretha, that would have made for a slightly better route on both ends. But it's the first weekend, right? You're just going to have to continue doing with what you've practiced the whole entire week. And sure, we have seen adaptations come over the course of the weekend with what strategies you're going to be running in Theater of Pain. But I think that, like you said, being consistent, just executing on your plan, and just running with what you think is the most effective at the time whenever you're devising the strategies is going to show you the most success coming, especially for a cup weekend.
Yeah, no question. And start talking about some of those strategies as well. I mean, some of the route differences we saw a little bit here too from both teams.
Yeah, so I think one of the bigger things that was actually different in this whole entire thing is the Disc Priest versus the Holy Paladin. I have to suspect that it's just purges plus bursting. Paladin, not always the greatest at dealing with bursting and some of those other things, and then you get a little bit of added value from the disc by being able to MD off, just mass dispel off that bursting whenever you need to, especially whenever you are doing the Portal Guardian with all the Soul Shackles. Whereas from the side of Evolving, they were doing the Executioner with the Soul Shackles, which that pull by itself is so scary. You see Alex at 10% health, basically perma. Prot Warrior is a tank that doesn't take a lot of damage in this dungeon just because of how block ends up working against most of these mobs, but at the same time, him sitting that low on HP is very, very scary. And Evolving and Perplexed were honestly neck and neck up until this Gore Chop wing, where Perplexed here is running a lot more of a typical strategy. They're pulling an insanely large pull inside of this Gore Chop wing, getting all of these sludge spewers, making sure that they're dodging the backle from the gas bag, where on the side of Evolving, they were having some issues where their Hunter is running down to Gore Chop while the rest of the group is fighting off this trash. You can see, like on the screen right there, the Hunter dies. At this point, this is kind of where everything fell apart for Evolving. I do think that they were still going to be a little bit further behind in time because they were going to be playing because Perplexed is going to be playing 3 Tormented mobs with Mordretha. But at the same time, once the Hunter issues happened with the camo and all that, it was kind of, the writing was on the wall for them, and Perplex was able to just, they did have 3 deaths, but at the same time they were not costly deaths in the same way.
Yeah, no question there. And, it's just interesting to start looking at what people are actually chaining with some of these Tormentors as well. I mean, we've been looking at, like, okay, well, what can they actually get away with and everything? But I don't know about you, but Zyro, I was terrified when I saw that lay on hands go out onto the Warrior as the healing debuff is already up on the entire party. His health just, didn't move at all.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that teams are going to get more comfortable with as we get further into this season. Now, unfortunately, the teams this week don't really have that luxury, right? They're just playing right now, but I think our second and third weeks of teams are going to have enough practice on this affix to where they'll be able to pretty comfortably go into the final boss with 3 and maybe in some really weird niche cases 4 of the debuffs on the boss. I think it'll be interesting to see how that kind of progresses throughout the season.
Yeah, and, as we start setting our sights as well in the next game here in Nagura, we're going to have Mists coming up onto this one. I think it's also going to be Tyrannical as well here. We got Raging Volcanic to accompany it. What are some of the things we were looking at yesterday that you want to see more of from Perplexed?
Yeah, so I'm actually incredibly interested to see what Perplex is planning for this dungeon specifically, because we haven't seen any team attempt to do like a one phase on the first boss, on Ingra, which seems really difficult on a 21 Tyrannical, but it is technically maybe possible if you run like a Venthy or Moonkin and something like that. So I wonder if that's something they're gonna try, or if they think it's not worth it. Because at some point as well, even if you get the one phase on Ingra, at some point you just have to figure out, like, is this really gonna be worth it if the rest of the dungeon is gonna be quite a lot slower? So at that point, you wonder if it's worth it to just really change up your whole, lineup. And then we've also seen some things with the mind control of the priests onto the mobs to make sure they use it on the boss. We'll see if I see anything like that. For Evolving, we've already seen them do this dungeon yesterday with the Prod Warrior as well. And they had a really fast time, 16 minutes. They did a lot of trash in the maze. They had Hunter as well, pulling stuff through the walls. They got up to 80% to this when they were the second boss. So they had to do barely any trash in that last trash area. And I wonder if Perplexed is going to show something different again, or if they're, just pressing W.
Yeah, and a lot of the teams, were looking at every opportunity they could, as you said, to grab mobs through other parts of the maze and the wall that they have to be worrying about. And in a lot of cases, people who are starting the maze first and everything like that, who are able to actually get a couple of different trash packs. We were seeing trinket usage titles. We were seeing players using their pets to be able to grab mobs through walls, all kinds of creativity to make sure they would be able to be as efficient as they possibly could.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the problem with the comp, is that you want so many different types of utility. You want to be able to pull infinite mobs through the wall. At the same time, you want to be able to one phase Ingra Malok, and so something has to give, whether it be a lot of boss damage on Ingra Malok, or whether it be being able to pull mobs through the maze like on cooldown. We did see some stuff where there was a tank trinket that was Ren from Tazavesh that tanks were using to be able to pull some of the mobs through the walls as well, but we're going to have to see what strategies these groups are going to be using here.
Yeah, let's find out. Game number 2 here getting underway in Mists.
All right, so we see the double Prod Warrior again. Very interesting to see the Warrior just being brought out here. Do you know any reason why they're playing the Warrior here in Mists?
Big damn.
Big damn.
And pretty much. It's also the physical comp, right? Like,
it's
if you aren't stacking any of the magic damage, having a Warrior is just the best thing, because that 10% attack damage buff, 5%, is pretty important.
Yeah, so it looks like they're definitely not going for that one phase strat. I would assume we would see quite a bit of a different setup if you were attempting to one phase Ingra. Then you would probably go with a more magic damage comp with the Vengeance Demon Hunter, the Moonkin, a mage for sure, right? So having the Windwalker, Rogue Hunter definitely means that they're not attempting to do that. And they'd rather go for, I would say this melee composition is really good for like not insanely big pulls, even though the Windwalker is good for that. But both the Rogue and the Hunter, they're really good at like moderate pulls, which I think happens a lot in this dungeon specifically because, first of all, you have these two ads that they're fighting right now on Perplexed side. They have a lot of HP, right? So you want to have a lot of two-target cleave for these specifically. And then later in the maze as well, you have a lot of smaller pulls where you can pull some trash on top through the wall, but mainly it's like 4 or 5 mobs, so you don't need insanely huge AoE bursts, and that's why this physical comp might be what they're running here specifically for Mists.
Yeah, already early on in the dungeon here, we saw Perplexed had a lot of problems with that very first pull. Took them a lot more time to deal with it. Evolving actually got to the boss probably a good 15 seconds before Perplexed did, so let's see if they can hold that lead and kind of try to open up more of an advantage for themselves here. Of course, it looks like Perplexed has kind of made up that difference in boss damage. As you can see, Droman has already dropped to about the same percentage for Perplexed. They're catching up very quickly. But it's all going to come down to the Ingra Malok burn here. Can you get Ingra Malok one-phased on this difficulty? It is a 21 Tyrannical, so the boss has a ton of HP to chew through. But you can see that Perplexed is actually opting to cleave Ingra Malok a lot more than Evolving is. And that kind of makes a little bit of sense here, right, too? Because if you're actually full-on burning Droman, you're going to get really, really weird timings with the Visage that fears your entire group. But you can see the Perplexed got that Visage, got a little bit more cleave damage, and then they're going to go into the Ingra Malok burn phase, and it would not surprise me at all if they were a lot lower on Ingra Malok damage. Let's see how it pans out for them here. Looks like Evolving got to that 40% mark. Let's see how low Perplexed gets it.
Yeah, so it looks like Evolving really didn't get the boss too incredibly low, while Perplexed, on the other hand, is just absolutely nuking that boss.
20?
Wow, okay, that's crazy. They might even just be able to finish off Ingra here without having to kill a Droman. And that's exactly what they're doing, so I'm gonna eat my words here. As I said, they're probably not gonna go for the one phase with this composition, and it looks like they can. Huge amount of damage is coming out of Perplexed to one phase Ingra and a 21 Tyrannical. That is absolutely crazy. And they're running the exact same comp as Evolving. So I'm not sure what they're doing differently. They must be like running, maybe someone is running a different setup, legendary. I'm gonna check that right now. But they must have some secret tech coming into this fight, being able to dish out so much more damage.
I mean, it's that on top of the extra cleave they did to the boss, right? They had the boss 10% lower than Evolving did when they went into that burn phase. So, yeah, it's that plus something else. Maybe better allocation of cooldowns, but, I mean, that tiny advantage Evolving had going to the boss is completely gone. Perplex has now opened up almost a 1 minute advantage for themselves just on the first boss alone based off of how they did their damage there. That's pretty nutty.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. This is why we talked about this one phase Ingra a lot on the broadcast, just because it really makes up so much time in this dungeon. Because in Mists, there's really like a limited amount of things you can do to make up a lot of time because of the maze, right? There's mobs you can pull through the wall sometimes, but it takes a while for those mobs to actually arrive at where you are, and until you can damage them, so it doesn't even speed up your pulls as much as it would otherwise if there wouldn't be, you know, walls in between the maze. And then later on as well, you really can't save that much time in the last trash area for the last boss, just because the stack horns cannot really be stacked. If you have multiple stack horns, you just run out of interrupts, and the heals and the shields just go through. So if you can save almost up to a minute on that first boss because you don't need to kill the Droman a second time, that's like the biggest time save possible in Mists, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing as well, we talked about this already from the runs yesterday, but a lot of where they gain their extra count and make this maze more efficient is by, again, just pulling as much trash as possible through the mists. Now, there's a few different ways to do that. If you have a pet class, it's easy to send your pet to go and attack those mobs, but some of the tech that we learned yesterday is the tanks are running a trinket from the new dungeon, Tazavesh. They're running this this Codex of the First technique. And actually, it only looks like Alex on the side of Evolve is running it. Divine Field isn't running it. So, essentially what the trinket does is, whenever you take damage, you have a chance to reflect some of that damage to whatever your current target is. So if you're tanking this pack of 4 mobs, but you're targeting mobs that are through the wall, that reflected damage from the trinket will go to the mobs through the wall, and your hunter doesn't have to waste time summoning a pet, sending the pet to go attack it, and then dismissing their pet because they're playing a talent that makes them do more damage when they have no pet. So just a little bit of min-maxing on the trinket front there.
Yeah, interesting. Lucy going down, unfortunately, for Evolving. They do have a battle arrest that they might just use to get him back up here. Yeah, so we do have Raging. So even if it's not fortified and the mobs don't do as much damage as they would otherwise, if they are in Raging range, then a lot of things just kill you. For example, standing in that frontal that these ads cast. And we know how difficult or how surprising it is once in a while if you get hit by that frontal, because you just, trying to figure out the maze, see where the exit is. And that is something that I mentioned yesterday already, but this maze in Mists is now not set anymore. It is set for both of the teams, but they don't know which one they're gonna get beforehand. So the maze itself is RNG, but it's the same for both of the teams. So they have to figure it out. Usually the healer does, oh no, it looks like Perplexed actually did go into the wrong area. As you can see, they all got ported back. So whatever happened,
what?
it didn't work out. Yeah, so I'm not sure who was the one checking the maze, but whoever it was unfortunately didn't get the correct one. So hopefully they can get the correct one now, as they are head-to-head really. I mean, this is a chance for Evolving to catch up. They are now also trying to get to the next area. I think they might just be at the same point in the dungeon now because of this mistake that they made with the maze. I
think they're still a little bit ahead. They did deal with the Night Blossom already, so They're still 1 pack ahead, but they just lost.
But they're 50%, right? So Evolving must have pulled something extra.
They pulled extra through trash because they have that trinket tech. They can more easily pull more trash mobs through the walls and get more trash. That's the value of having that trinket tech. You can see here they've pulled 2 trash packs on top of the Night Blossom just because they can use that trinket to pull different trash packs through the wall. It's extremely efficient to help out with that, especially if you have the comp that we have right now that can very easily knock things back with the volcanic epics. Look how much these mobs are getting knocked every time the volcanic spawns, by the way. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, so it looks like Perplexed is up to 66% trash as they're pulling Mistcaller. It looks like they're pulling it to the side because they very likely want to pull more trash on top. There we go. And now it's being pulled from the left side. So very efficient trash pull. But they're not going to go all the way up to the same amount of trash that Evolving has on this boss pull. Because as I said earlier, Evolving on their route, they kill 80% trash when Mistcaller is dead. So Perplexed definitely going to be a little bit behind with trash afterwards, but they're going to have to make up for later, unless Perplexed somehow pulls even more trash onto Mistcaller at some point, right? That is still possible as well. And if you look at the difference in trash now, it's probably going to be, that frontal was, that was such a good stun. Was that a Shine? I think a Shine just interrupted the frontal with a rogue stun and probably saved 3 of his players.
Huge plays. So let's look at the trash damage percentage here. Trash percentage. It's going to be, looks like maybe, if I remember correctly, it's going to be about 5 or 6% more trash for Evolving if I have done my math correctly. We'll see whenever they finish this off here. But that's something that I don't think is too huge of an advantage, right? Because the thing about this dungeon is that there's just tons of trash after Mistcaller, right? You can pull pretty much as big as you want, and you can make up that trash percentage with a clean, efficient AoE pull. I would take being 30% ahead on a boss over having 7% more trash, I think, any day really.
Yeah, I think so as well, especially since, what we've seen Evolving do yesterday was that they were missing like 2% trash when they killed the last boss, and then they had to go and pull another trash pack to kill, to get that last percent, the last 2% that they needed, which doesn't seem incredibly efficient to me. Like, it seems like if you go into the last boss fight with 98% trash, then you would want to pull something that you can cleave down with the boss, right? Because we don't have Pride anymore, so that means it doesn't matter if you get to 100% while the boss is still being fought, because you don't have like a Pride mob spawning or anything like that. So if Perplexed can do that somehow, or they can do one big pull where they get the trash percentage that they need, or maybe even just do one trash pull and then pull the boss with some trash, then they would be the same amount of pulls as Evolving, right? So I agree with you. I don't think having that 80% is going to mean as much as it might seem now.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of looking at some of the differences in the gear setups from some of these characters. I totally didn't get any of this information from my producer, and I'm pretending like I know what I'm saying. But it looks like even though they're running the exact same class comp setups, they're running slightly different builds. So for instance, on the rogues, they're running mostly the same builds. They still have crit as their first priority, but Shelly on Evolving is prioritizing mastery as a second stat versus versatility from a Shine over on Perplexed. And on top of that, the hunters are running different soul binds. Wolf Disco is running Mechanicos, and Vochi is running Pelagos. And I could be wrong about this. I'm not a hunter main by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm pretty sure if you run Mechanicos, that makes your Resonating Arrow up for every single volley, right? Because if you hit 5 targets, that makes your Resonating Arrow a 40-second cooldown. So that seems like it's a pretty decent way to stack your cooldowns, especially in a dungeon like Mist where there's just multiple AoE pulls back to back to back, like in the Maze.
Yeah, I do want to pretend like I know anything about MM Hunters, but I don't. So I'm just not going to comment anything on that. The only thing that I was thinking maybe that Wolf Disco, I was thinking that maybe he went with a Soulbind that gives him a little bit of a single target boost, because Perplexed was the team that actually managed to one-face that boss. But yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe Vusi was like, you know what, we're not going to one-face the first boss anyway, so I'm going to go more of an AoE build. But the way you explained it seemed like the Wolf Disco build seems to be the AoE build. So I'm not sure what the difference in thought process is here for those teams. But it looks like Perplexed did get done with their big trash pull, so they still need 11%, but a lot of the trash seems just to be pulling on top of the boss. As you can see, Tradova being engaged with all of this trash still hitting Divine Field. So it really likely seems to be the thing that I talked about earlier, where they're just going to be pulling the last few percentages that they need on top of the boss, which is going to mean that they're not going to lose any time at all compared to Evolving, because what Evolving is doing is they do a big trash pull, then they pull the boss by itself, and then afterwards they get 2% trash. So if Perplexed, pulls everything on top of the boss, which they're doing right now, they are at 100%, then that means they didn't lose any time whatsoever for skipping a little bit more trash in the maze area.
Yep. I mean, you explained it better than I could have, to be honest. I mean, I was still caught up on the Hunter thing in my mind, because the way that I'm thinking about it is, if you're playing a Hunter, why are you worried about your Soulbind offensively? You should be worried about playing defensively, so you're not like on the floor the entire time like you're used to whenever you see Hunter players.
True.
But yeah, it looks like having that extra percentage in the maze really hasn't even worked out that well for Evolving here, as Perplexed has just blasted all of their trash, and like you mentioned, just pulled a bunch of it on top of the boss for efficiency's sake too. And they now have a 50% boss health lead on a 21 Tyrannical Key, which is nigh impossible to catch up from. Perplexed would have to wipe in order for Evolving to come back at this point. And again, just a pretty much perfect key coming out of Perplexed. 0 deaths on the board. I would say it was perfect if it wasn't for that mishap in the maze.
Yeah, and if you look at the time, they could have been, like, the boss would have been dead at this point, I would even say, if they wouldn't have messed up in the maze there, right? So this is an incredibly fast strategy, and this is what I really love about Perplexed. Not only are they really clean, but they're just so smart when it comes to efficiency in dungeons. They know exactly what kind of pulls they have to do, and sometimes it doesn't look fancy, right? Nothing that Perplexed did in this dungeon seemed incredibly fancy, except the one phase of the first boss, of course. But the way they're pulling is just so efficient. They know what they should be doing and what is not actually going to be efficient to do. So they just go exactly for those pulls, and it always seems to be working out for them, as they're just incredibly clean. 0 deaths in this mist. One-faced Ingra, the first team to do that in Shadowlands Season 2, and they're winning this series against Evolving 2-0.
That's right, Perplexed putting together an amazing run here in Mist, despite that little mishap, of course. But hey, I mean, shout out to Evolving, improving their previous mist time by probably about a minute or so than what we saw yesterday. So they're already making great strides to be able to improve on what they've already practiced. So they will end up dropping to that lower bracket. We'll be able to see more of them later today. But congrats to Perplexed, because they are going to be moving on to tomorrow. Going to move on to Championship Sunday. And it also, Tettles, puts them 1 win away from qualifying for our Globals.
Yeah, I think this is to be expected. They were our number 1 overall seed for the whole entire tournament, Evolving the number 12 overall seed
good.
for the whole entire. Yeah, Perplexed, pretty good. I think the bigger story for me is that, like, okay, so yeah, Perplexed looked very consistent. This is what we expect from them. Evolving, that mists, outside of just not being able to save Ashen Hollow for the first boss and one phase it looked very similar to what Perplexed was doing in their mists, which is very promising for Evolving moving forward into some of the more competitive matches, which is versus Sheesh and Team Name in my